So first, let's understand what we are talking about when we are saying science writing. I think you might have heard the phrase science writers or science writing, but what exactly do we mean by science writing? So here are like a few examples of writing which you might have seen across. You might have seen your science textbooks, and you might have seen children's magazines, which have like small snippets about science. And then there are newspapers where you might have seen articles about climate change, or of course the new hot area of this thing, which is COVID, articles about how the virus spreads. And then there is, you might have read some interesting book about science fiction. I've just put Frankenstein. I don't know, where it's about the scientist who tries to, sews up a human being and brings him to life, and tries to create a human being. So that kind of fiction, but still kind of based on science. So what do you think amongst all of these things which have come across? Which ones do you think count as science writing, and which ones do you think don't count as science writing? Or if there is any other example which you might have come across, which you think is science writing, but are probably not mentioned here. So yeah.
So Surat and Sneha,
Yeah.
some are saying sci-fi.
Yeah. Okay.
Anushka talks of science research in science journals, which of course is
Yes.
some. But Surat will tell us the details between science and scientific and all.
So science journals will come to that. So that is kind of, but then the slight difference will kind of come to that in a bit. So yeah.
So Surat, I mean, I am in my non-expert way would think all are science writing.
Yeah. So basically, if you kind of see what is the common thread about all of these examples, all of these are pieces of writing, and all of these are they basically talk about science, right? So basic element about science writing is that it should be a kind of a writing piece, and it should address some aspect of science. But science, so if you think about it, so science magazines or newspapers, they all fall into the realm of science writing, you could say. But science fiction kind of falls in the gray area, because sometimes it may not be based on the actual principles of science. So you can kind of think, because it's also partly fiction. So ideally science writing should follow the what is the known processes of science, and it should be based on what is known and what do we actually know about science. So fiction can kind of go into the other dimension, where you can make up laws of physics. I can make up a fiction about where a person might float, so that person may not really follow the laws of physics, so to say. So there it kind of falls into gray area, so you can make a call, so whether it is science writing or not. But then of course these are all terminologies. Basically it should be something, any piece of writing which talks about science or tries to explain science in a common layman language, which either a normal person who does not belong to, who's not a scientist, or a kid, or someone who doesn't belong to science, they are also able to understand that piece of science. So that is the basic point when we say science writing. So it can be like a blog, it can be a magazine article, it can be a newspaper article, it can be a book. So what is the common theme which kind of binds all of these things together is writing about science, which kind of seems intuitive. It is science writing, so it is basically writing about science. So yeah, so it can take on any of these forms, but basic idea is it should be based on scientific facts, and it should not be something out of your imagination. So it should be based on the scientific principles, and the ideas should be based on that. So yeah, so now we kind of have an idea of what exactly is science writing. So why do we think science writing is important? So we already have scientists who are working, and they publish in journals, and so why do we need science writing? So to say, so you might have all heard about Einstein, I guess, Albert Einstein, and he had, maybe you might have heard about his famous theory of relativity. So, and all of us most probably have heard about it, but most of us don't have any clue about what actually he did. We have heard of it in periphery, equals to mc square, and his theory of relativity. So, but then we don't really understand what, many of us might not understand what he actually did. So I came across this book which was very interesting, and it was about Einstein's life. So let's just read the story to say what the story, how the story goes about. So I'll just kind of minimize. So yeah, so the story is about Einstein's life, how he was a kid, and almost till 5 years he did not speak. So almost, and his parents were very worried that why is he not speaking. So by 6 years he gradually started, speaking sentences, and he was a very curious kid. And so we'll just read the story. So one day, as Albert was zipping through the countryside on his bicycle, he looked up at the beams of sunlight speeding from the sun to the earth. He wondered what would it be like to ride on one of those beams. And in his mind, then and there, Albert was no longer on his bicycle, no longer on the country road. He was racing through the space on a beam of light. It was the biggest, most exciting thought Albert had ever had, and it filled his mind with questions. Wait, wait.
That is beautiful. Which
Yeah.
book is this, Surat?
Yeah, so it's called Beam of on a Beam of Light. So I remember reading this anecdote when I was a kid, that how Einstein came, like when he was a kid, when he was just dreaming about how it would be. He was seeing the sun rays, and then one day he just thought about how would it be like if I was on one of those beams of light, and if I just raced through those beams of light, how would it be like. And then he thought, he figured that if he could travel, so as you all know, light is fastest. The speed of light is the fastest, and he thought that if he could travel near the speed of light, if he figured if he could travel near the speed of light, crazy things would happen. Only minutes would pass for Albert, while years and years would pass for the rest of us. So, and then the story. So the idea was so amazing. People didn't believe it at first, but scientists today has proven that it is true. So basic thought which he had was, if he could move at the speed of light, which is like the fastest thing there is. So the idea of time is all relative. Like for example, between me and you, how we experience time, it's all because we are all on the similar time scale, so as to imagine. But if I am moving at a very fast scale, for example, on a beam of light, so time would slow down for me. So this kind of story explains the concept of time and how it can be a relative thing in a very beautiful way, right? And so yeah, so and then let's look at another story. Okay, this is like one story about physics. So there are lots of such very interesting stories in biology, for example. So you might know about penicillin. I think you have had some sessions on antibiotics. So while we might know in our science textbooks about penicillin and antibiotics and how it kills bacteria, but then the story about how penicillin was discovered is very interesting. So so this is another story which for example, this was a scientist who was Alexander Fleming, and he was a doctor and a scientist like Dr. Karishma, and he was a scientist in England, and he was trying to figure out how to kill bacteria. And he was experimenting with bacteria when some of his experiments suddenly kind of got a mold, which is like kind of fungus. And then what he found was that the bacteria was not really growing around this mold. And then he kind of took out this mold, and then he found that this mold was actually which eventually he called it penicillin. This mold could actually kill the bacteria. So this entire story is very interesting about how he came about, discovering penicillin or the antibiotic or general antibiotics as we talk about. So if you go through these stories, so it kind of conveys the beauty behind the science. For example, so if we compare it to a piece of scientific writing, now as someone had said, about scientific writing about science, which is published in journals or scientific, where people publish scientific pieces. So the same thing about the theory of relativity, which we saw how Einstein, how it was described in that book. The same thing if we read it in so-called, how scientists write about. So this, like, I'll not go through the whole thing because it's very boring. So it's like Einstein's theory of relativity is one of the first papers published. Then theory, blah blah blah, and then it's like E equals to mc square, and then you kind of lose track of it by the end of it, right? You've like forgotten where it actually, what the person is actually talking about. So this is unfortunately, this is how most scientific writing, looks and sounds like. So it's like usually too complex and difficult to understand for a person who's not from science. The same thing if you look at the scientific writing, like if you look at the Einstein story, it's trying to say the same thing. Basically, it's talking about how time is relative, but then it also connects with you in a way that you can understand what exactly he's talking about and what was going through his mind when he came up with such a beautiful concept, how he would have actually thought about it. Because we think that we always know that scientists, ex-scientists came up with this principle or this theorem, but what exactly would have been going in that scientist's mind when he thought of that principle or that experiment or something. So that's very interesting to kind of understand. And mostly when we are doing science, we don't really do that. In our science textbooks, they'll just give out theorems or this experiment or this the maths equation. So we don't really get to know how the scientist came up with that equation, and the way he or she might have come up with it might be very, very beautiful thought process.
Very much. So we'll stop for some questions.
Sure.
Do that because they're now populating. Go ahead, Snehal. I see lots of questions actually now. They're all very inspired, it seems. Yes.
Yes. So Anirudh has a very nice question. Anirudh's question is science writing written to inspire people?
Yes, definitely. It can be, like, I was inspired by science writing when I was growing up. So I used to like go to one of my uncle's place, and who had like this small library of sorts where he used to have all these small books about scientists, and it was just like popular stories, and I used to read them, and I used to feel like, oh my god, there are all these great people who have done great things, and I was definitely inspired by that. So, and one of the thing is to convey the beauty of science. That's what science writing should attempt to do. Of course, one thing is to convey the simplicity and make it less complex, but also convey the beauty behind it, which is often lost in science textbooks and lectures and all of that, which is one of the most important thing as a science writer, because the idea is that you should both inspire and inform the reader. So definitely.
Beautiful. Inspire and inform. Yes. So then Snehal and Surat, our young minds are talking of movies they watched. Like Anushka talked about Interstellar.
Yes.
And Athansh talks about a movie called Finch, which they call futuristic movies.
Yes.
So that would be in the genre of science writing, somebody who writes a script for this movie.
Yes. So again, it would fall somewhere in between science fiction and science writing, because many of them are based on current principles, but also something sometimes sort of imagination, right? Because like we discussed, many of these things you have people, laws of physics are sometimes, not followed, or you have something, where a dead person might suddenly come alive because you're injecting with a certain, formula. So some of them are like currently not known in the current so-called in our scientific knowledge. So it falls between, I would say, science writing, which is based on the known evidence-based principles of science, and your imagination. So. Yeah.
And then Surat, Abhay asks, is Foundation, Isaac Asimov's Foundation, in the same league?
Right. So I guess that's also because some of it are also like futuristic concepts.
Yes.
So again, it's like a gray area. So yeah. So you have
it's like Koya says Inception. But Surat, I remember in 60s, 70s, there were movies where you saw them with some device on their ear.
Yes,
And
yes.
then people must have wondered what it was. But basically,
Yes,
they
yes,
put some things together and thought that
yes.
we will have cell phones in another 10,
Yes, yes.
15 years.
Yes, yes. So some of them might, for us, because we might not know the knowledge, but then some of them might be futuristic, but they might be based on very sound principles of science. So then in that case, it could still fall under science writing, because although they are not there now, but in theory, they could be like 50 years down the line. So that would still be, based on scientific basis. So it could still fall in science writing. Yeah, yeah.
Okay, I think we can move ahead. We'll come back to some questions after a few more slides.
Sure, sure. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So, yeah, but even science is also about imagination. So it's okay to let your mind, run wherever it wants to, because when you're designing scientific experiments, also you need like, fair bit of imagination or creativity to design, new kind of experiments, or think about how your theory could come true. So that's also definitely an element of something I wouldn't discourage in any way. Like, even though if it's like imagination, so it's not that that's definitely something which is required um, in your either science writing or science in general. So so just to kind of summarize what we have been talking. So, what does science writing do? So, one, it helps to simplify complex topics which we might not normally understand. But second, equally important is it helps to convey the beauty of science and scientific experiments, and how a scientist came up with that particular principle or thought process, and just to kind of get behind the process of the science itself. So it also helps. Ideally, it should a good piece of writing should also delve a bit on that. So not just kind of convey, okay, this was the discovery which the scientist made, but also delve a bit in how he or she came upon that discovery, and what was the process, how did she think about this kind of the discovery which he or she made. So that should ideally a good piece of writing should also touch a bit upon that, rather than just conveying, okay, this is what the scientist discovered and this what it means. So some kind of thought process should also be if it's involved, it's like kind of it should be a good piece of writing. So so now we we've kind of touched upon what is science writing and why is it really required. So now let's go to the next topic about, if how do I become a science, if I want to become a science writer, what can I write about, where do I start, where can I submit, if I have written something, where do I submit it. So so when you talk about science story, it's often similar to any kind of story which you have possibly read, any normal story which you have read. So there are often elements which are similar to a science story or a good interesting story that you might have read. So so here, if maybe if you can tell, what is your favorite story and why do you like it. So so we'll try to understand why does anyone like any story or something which they might have read it and stuck to their mind. So
So, like, for example, I was giving the beauty of science. When everyone says Fleming was supposed to discard those plates, but he just kept them on the side, it gives you a little bit of background to how he came to see that plate.
right.
Like, as boring as he just saw the plate.
Yeah.
That is the beauty. That is the little bit about the process.
Right. Sure. So for example, like not a science story, but like when I was a kid, I used to read all of these stories about normal kid who would be sitting in a bus, and suddenly that kid, if some thieves come, that kid would like fight and like show some elements of bravery. And I would imagine, okay, maybe I could also do something like that. And I would imagine each time I would go on a bus or journey, I would imagine I would hope like maybe some thieves would come, so that I could maybe start to show when I suddenly become like this brave Surat and like fight all those thieves. So so one of the things which a story which we like is somehow we are able to connect to it. When you read a story, and most if you think about any story which you like, there'll be elements to which you can connect. So for example, you would probably like stories where I mean, I don't know, but like I can speak for myself, which was about like a normal kid who died, who did probably, very interesting things. So just 1 second.
Yes, exactly, Surat. So, Surat, Anushka says Interstellar because the plot is deep. Also, The
Right.
Man Who Knew Infinity because it's about Ramanujan.
Right.
And we are asking others to also populate. Samarth has populated with something that looks like a panda. I don't know if that's the name of a movie, but we will find out from Samarth. Um, so, what are the other kind of stories that would fascinate? So it's very strange, but when you watch Mahabharata, right, and in the
Right.
last scene when they are putting these yantras and whatever you call them, I used to keep trying to think what is the scientific principle behind that spinning chakra, or
Right.
as a child watching that,
Right.
like
Right.
what would it be if we had to make something like that work today? What would be the mechanization involved?
Right. Right.
So then Anushka says Frankenstein again.
Right. Right.
Athansh mentioned someone called Samay Godika who got some prize for explaining complex science simply. Okay,
Oh,
great,
nice.
great. A time machine.
Yeah.
Yes. But then, I mean, a great story is penicillin, of course.
Yes. 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 But yeah, so any story when you think about it should have some element of, personal touch about the person about whom you are, whom you are reading, and along with, the science snippet which the person might have done, might
So,
have done.
Surat, this is a great point. Anushka talks of xenobots. They are a type of robot that reproduce. It is a most recent science article, which I believe CNN and PNAS News picked up. So probably she has read it there.
Right.
It was very exciting, the headline,
Right. Right.
but there was a bit of controversy also about overselling it.
Right. Right. Yes. Yes.
But she brings it up. So obviously they are very contemporary, Surat.
Yes. Yes.
For
Yes.
these sessions, we've got to be super prepared, as you can see.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
Right. So I think that's like that's something which keeps coming up. When you're trying to sell a story, science as a science writer, you definitely have to catch the person's attention. So many times you like there's a fine. So there is a debate, because sometimes overselling also helps to reach out to people, because when you write something as robots which reproduce, definitely anyone who is not interested in science will definitely click on it. But having something which is like, which actually they would have done, it would probably be too boring, or too not boring in the sense it will not be so out of the blue. So so whether you have to make a call whether overselling, the benefits of overselling versus benefit of capturing someone's attention who otherwise might not be interested in that new piece of science. So yeah. So yeah. So any story, it should have of course exciting science, but also some elements of personal touch which helps you to connect with the reader, so that I when I'm reading it, like I should also be able to connect. I could be a kid, or I could be engineer, or I could be a doctor, but when I read the story, if I make a connection, if I read something which kind of relates to me, so it helps to get across to the reader in a better way. So and so which comes to our next point, which is like one of the most important aspects to think about whenever you start writing a science story, is to think about who am I writing this for. So also usually when writers, when they start off, there's something which they don't do. They just start writing off a story, and they think about themselves, like how how you would like to write a story, and then what is the story in their mind. But before you start writing, one thing which you should think about is, who am I writing the story for? Am I writing this for my friends? Am I writing this for my parents, grandparents, family, or in general? So because the way you connect to that audience would differ based on who you are writing this for. Because for example, if I'm writing this for my friends, I would try to connect with them, about aspects of the story which I'm writing in a different way. than, for example, if I'm writing for my parents or grandparents or general or people in general. So this is one of the most important things you should think about before you start writing. So which people often do not realize, and this is one of the reasons why a story as a story, it might not connect with the right audience. And so this is yeah, so think about who you're writing for first before you start writing, once you decide to write. So, and the next step, next thing, okay, so you've decided, okay, I want to, write something, and you feel like maybe, but then you're kind of confused about, okay, what do I write about? Now you've decided, okay, I want to write something, okay, and I want to possibly write about for my friends, or you've decided that, but then you're not sure, okay, what do I write about? There are so many things which possibly you could write about. So one thing is, there are different, so especially in current situation, right? So there are so many things which you could write about, which would immediately catch people's fancy. So one is like science is all around us. It's not just in great science which happens in the lab, but science is immediately, like, if you look around, it's happening. It's basically all around us. So one is like global situations which we're all currently aware of, which could be like COVID or climate change, which are which are like immediate things which we can think of, and all of that has basically science embedded in it. So it's all based, so you could whatever aspect of these global situations you feel excited about. Why do you think global warming is happening? Our countries, like, which are closer to coastal areas, where they're often said that they'll possibly face the brunt more. So why is that? And of course COVID, so how are the new strains emerging? So there are so many things which you are confused about and you want to know more. So if you think about, okay, so what do you want to know about? So possibly if you're writing the article for your friends, possibly they would also be interested in trying to understand the kind of questions you are also thinking about. So you could
So, Surat, some good questions have come when you're writing of topics that are controversial, like, say, global warming,
yes,
or how vaccines work for COVID, or
right,
things like Anirudh says that you're writing a truth, but no one is agreeing, like you're bordering on heresy or things like that, right? What is the approach to take? You just stick to the science? Because if you write about global warming, surely there are going to be lots of opinions saying that this doesn't even exist. To
right,
some countries saying that we are going to be submerged. Some island nations will say we are going to be submerged in the next 20 years. And
yes,
some countries will say, oh, there's nothing like this. So
yes.
what's the right tack a science writer has to take?
Yeah, so as a science writer, your article should be based on science. So not on anecdotes, not on people's ex-persons' opinions, or some political will. So anything, it should be based on science. So as a science writer, your fundamental duty is towards science and conveying what the actual science is trying to say. So this often also involves trying to dig a bit deeper than what seems on the surface. So that's also involved. So if you feel something is controversial, possibly there are so many so-called pseudo-scientific pieces floating around. So you have to kind of dig through all of that and try to understand what is actually based on science and what is actually based on someone's anecdote. Someone said something that this is not being caused by this, and the entire thing is based on what that X person said, or is it actually based on what the scientists have been saying or have discovered for so many decades of research now. So whatever, as a science writer, your fundamental duty is towards what the science says, and ideally nothing else.
And I think that's a really good example of why, as a science writer, it's important for you to understand science, right? Because you actually do have to dig deep. You really do have to go and read some of these research papers that scientists may have written, try and understand what are the experiments that they're doing. Are they doing them right? Are they drawing the right conclusions from their experiments? Or are they trying to oversell their own work? These are all the questions that you need to answer, and to be able to do that, you really need to understand science. So I think that's a really good example of why you do use science in your everyday life as a science writer.
Yes, yes, and especially in COVID, we have come across so many
Exactly.
WhatsApp articles on how, drinking gargling warm water or like drinking. And there was these initial articles where, where it was said that you should continuously drink warm sips of water, which will kill the virus in your throat. So as a science writer, it's your kind of, it becomes your responsibility to kind of keep dispelling all these fake rumors and anecdotes which keep floating around and kind of debunk all these myths in a language which is kind of understandable by everyone, because scientists are currently debunking all of these things which they are saying about COVID, but most of them is not understandable by the normal public. So as a science writer, you become the interface between the scientists and the public and normal public, and then you kind of, you are like this instrument which kind of, re-scrambles what a scientist says and then into like, in normal language which you and me can, or everyone can understand.
All right, I think we can move ahead, Surat, and then we'll come back to some more questions later.
Sure. So global situations, and another is everyday observations. We have so many things which are happening. How does milk boil? How do bubbles form? How there are so many things where if you keep a ladle in a boiling pot, it doesn't boil over. So there are so many things which are happening around us if you think about it, and everything is based on some scientific fact. There is suddenly you have all these. In Chennai, we have been having floods, for the last, which has been, greatest in last 100 years or something. So why is suddenly all of this happening? It has not been raining, but suddenly something like this is happening. So why do you think that is happening? And so there are things around you. If you just look around, there is like science behind every observation that which is, happening around you. Some light bulb fuse, everything is based on science. You can write about something which kind of, which you just look around you and you feel something is interesting and you're just doing your thing, and you can write about because if it's interesting to you, possibly it's interesting to many kids of your age or generally. So just write about whatever is around you which is like interesting. So and second is, if you like, I think many of you, I'm seeing, as Karishma says, you're like quite well read. So you read something on the internet, or or you saw something, you saw some movie, or you read a book on which something interesting was written, and then you write about, delve into a bit deeper and write about what exactly you could write your own interpretation of what happens in that story. Put your own twist to it. So so if you read this, like someone said about these robots which reproduce, you could write your own version of it, and submit it to some kids magazine. So you could write, because I don't think many many kids possibly would not be writing about those things. So if you know about some interesting thing or some interesting science research which has come out, you can write about it, and you can send it to various places which will come to where you can send it. So just keep your eyes and ears open, and anything interesting you can write about. There's no dearth of things which you can write about. So yes, so we've kind of have an idea of what all you can write about. So now you know what science writing is, how you can go about writing it. So let's assume you have written your first science writing piece and you're very excited about it, and now you're kind of thinking, okay, I've written my piece, and where do I send it now? So now again, there are several options which you can explore. So there are several children's magazines which publish small science stories. These are just few examples. Like IntelliJelly, and there are few others which I kind of see that they have these small snippets of science stories. So you can send it to all of these children's magazines, and check if your school has a magazine. So many schools these days have their own magazines, right? And if your school doesn't have it, you can initiate, you can talk to your teachers and talk to your principal and be the one to initiate it. That's like, and I'm sure everyone would be very enthusiastic about having, it's something which of starting. So you could be, have founder of your own school's magazine, and your name could go down in the history. So if your school doesn't have it, so it's like it could be a big thing. So you have like start a small magazine in your school, and then you could contribute, and you could become like the editor of the school magazine. And then, you could form like a small group in your school, get your friends together, and start like, small, have like in-house science writers and editors, like a small newsroom. And you could have it like, after school activity, and take your teachers help, if you take your English teachers or science teachers help to kind of put it together. So that's something which could be like a very interesting activity. And this is something which can be done, online also. If I'm not sure if if your kids are going to school. So this is something which you could coordinate. So yeah, and newspapers. Many newspapers have kids sections these days. Like Hindu has it, and it's called Hindu Young World. So they take kids articles, and also science stories. So this includes both science stories and normal stories. But then yeah, science stories also you could send it to many of these newspapers. And another option is you can also start your own blog. So that's something which many writers do now. So before they start writing, they start their own blog, and they write their stories there. And there are several free sites where you can create your own blog. So WordPress is one such example, and it's very easy to kind of just create your own site. You could possibly take the help of your parents or siblings, and just start publishing your own, blog. And but just a side note, like before you get on like just talk to your parents about internet safety before you kind of start your own blog. But that's like a great way to start also. You can have your own website, you can have your own blog. So these things are very easy nowadays. You don't have to invest a lot of money or experience or computer knowledge to kind of do these things. So these are fairly straightforward. So these are some of the things you could start doing, where you could start publishing your stories.
Surat, Anirudh asks, what is a blog?
Okay, so blog is basically where it's kind of like a like you can create your account on all these. There are these blogging sites. For example, WordPress is one blogging site where you can create your account, and you can just write a story and just publish it as an article on your own blog. Like so it can be of any word limit or any. It doesn't have to be. So it can be on. So maybe I can show how WordPress looks like, or yeah, so basically it's like a website kind of thing where you can just put your articles and kind of store. It's like a diary, but it's like online. So if that makes sense. So yeah, so basically you can put all your articles. It's basically like an article, but or a diary, which is like online. So you can write whatever you want and kind of put it there on your blog, and everyone can see it. You can just post the blog article link to everyone, and everyone can kind of go click that link and read that article. So yeah, maybe we can have a session on kind of creating a blog. So which is so WordPress, if you just type WordPress, you can just go and log in. Maybe you can take your parents' help and create an account there, and you just type whatever article you want to write, and just if you just post it, it'll just come on that website. And then you can take that link and maybe send it to your friends or family and say that, okay, I've written this article, please have a look, and then you can look for feedback. So
okay, very nice. So Surat, Athansh had a very nice, also Snehal, a very nice description of, he said he's fascinated by a documentary 14 Peaks, which he watched today. What is the science behind climbing a mountain is something he wants to write about now.
Yeah, sure. That's like a great example of what we were like. If you come across something, watch something interesting, is definitely you can write about that, and then you can write like a small piece, and then you can send it to all these places that we have discussed. So whenever you read or see something interesting, and you want to know more about it, and also want to tell, the world more about some aspect which you feel excited about. So definitely you can go ahead and write about. That's how I said, like, one of my first pieces was, I read something and I was very excited about it, and I had never read about that piece of thing which I had read, and I wanted to, like, let more people know about it. So I wrote like a popular article, and then because I was surprised more people didn't know about it, and because I was very excited about the topic. So definitely, if you are excited about something and you want to communicate to the world, this, hey, come, this is such an exciting topic, and you should, maybe via your article you can convey that excitement. So yeah, definitely.
And I think that's a really important part of the writing, that you have to be excited about what you're writing about.
Yes.
If you don't
Yes.
like it, your writing's also not going to be good.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, conveying the excitement of what that's, as a science writer, as we discussed, like, it should be inspiring, and you should be able to convey the excitement behind that science. It shouldn't be just to convey information. Okay, the XYZ did XYZ. He saw a petri plate. He saw fungus. He discovered. It shouldn't be that. It should be like trying to excite. Obviously, because that scientist discovered, and he was excited about discovering that thing. So you have to like capture that element of excitement, how that person was feeling when he first discovered that compound or that process, and try to convey that excitement to the person. When I read the article, I should be, oh my god, that would have been such an exciting moment when that person made the discovery. So which is what science is about, right? Most scientists do science because they are excited about it. It's, of course, the getting a discovery out of it is like a plus point, but the day-to-day events is because the scientist is just excited about doing science. So that excitement should be conveyed in your article as a science writer.
Okay, I think we can move ahead.
Sure.
And then we'll come back to questions at the end now.
Sure. Okay, so yes, so now we have, you have written your article, you know what science writing, and you also published it. So, and now you have like a few articles out, and now so how do you become like a proper science writer, so to say, to get the tag, so for most professions, we have a path kind of laid down. How do you become a doctor? You go to school, you go to medical college, you become a doctor. How do you become an engineer? You go to school, you go to engineering college, you become an engineer. So you have a well-defined path. So fortunately or unfortunately, for science writing, there is like no defined path. You go to school, and then there are science writers who have done a BSc undergrad or postgraduate degree in science, and then they have become science writers. There have been science writers who have done a PhD in science and then become science writers. There are also science writers who have absolutely no background in science, in the sense till schooling they had, but then after their schooling they probably did something, a journalism degree or a communication degree or a degree in media or something, and then they became science writers. Many of the science writers in newspapers, for example, if you look at their backgrounds, they probably may not have a science degree. They might not have done a postgraduate degree or a PhD in science before becoming science writers. So and they are pretty good science writers. It doesn't necessarily, you don't necessarily need to do a PhD in science to become a science writer. So although my path was, for example, I went to school, I did my PhD and then became a science writer. There is no defined path as such to be a science writer, but what helps is to have a basic understanding of science, because many a times, as we have discussed, we need to dig a bit deeper into what seems to be the popular narrative, what someone is saying, climate, like we discussed about climate change, right? So many people say that, okay, there isn't going to be a significant change in temperature, this is all farce. So you have to kind of understand some elements of what the science actually says. So you should have some basic understanding of science, which might come from a science degree, or it might come from reading more widely, or trying to understand how to kind of sift through data. So the basic idea, you should be able to sift through what is there and kind of understand what is real and what is not real. So that kind of understanding you may get via a science degree, or it could be via a journalism degree, or it could be, so it doesn't, so the degree does not really this thing, but make sure that you have some basic understanding of how what scientific principles are, or you're able to sift through data to understand what is correct and what is not correct. So yeah, so the short answer is there is no path. And but to become a science writer, so you could take on various trajectories to ultimately, and which is, and most science writers, if you look at it, most of them will have a different trajectory than what is kind of mentioned here.
Okay, sure. We can get questions in the end. We can move on now.
Okay, yeah. Okay. So yeah. So what can you do now? So now that okay. So at this stage of your life, if you want to become a science writer 10 years or 15 years down the lane. So what can you start doing now? So one is, as a writer, as any writer, not just a science writer. If you want to become any kind of writer, one of the first thing is you should read a lot and as widely as possible, and read good pieces of writing, because reading good pieces of writing will kind of tell you what a good piece of writing looks like, and kind of tell how, not exactly copy, but then kind of give you a more of insight as to what kind of, how a good piece of writing looks like. And as a science writer, you always one often has to kind of draw analogies to scientific discoveries. So reading more as much as possible and as widely as possible just gives you that kind of tools to become like a prolific writer, to write in any area of science as much as, and you don't have to be limited in the area in which you get the degree from. For example, if you have a degree in biology, necessarily you don't have to become a biology writer. But the more you read for becoming any kind of writer, you should read as much and as widely as possible. Don't restrict yourself, at least at this stage. Don't restrict yourself. Okay, I'll only read, science fiction kind of books, because there is like plenty of good literature out there, which also which also kind of tells you how to write beautifully, because you also have to convey the beauty of science apart from capturing the scientific aspect. So that element of beauty of writing itself comes from a lot of good literature which is out there, English literature. So read as much as possible and start writing. Most of it, it's also a matter of practice. It's like anything else, the more you write, the better you get at it. So if I myself look at one of my initial articles, the first few articles versus what I write now, I see a huge difference, and it's a constant process. So start writing, something. It doesn't have to be marvelous. It doesn't have to be like a great piece of work. It can be something, start writing a diary. It can be something which you write every day. So it's just a habit which you kind of inculcate. It's like, learning to play an instrument. The more you practice, the better you get at it. So just start writing, start a diary, or like we said, start writing your own blog, or, start your own magazine, school magazine, or, start your own thing. So which could be like, monthly thing, which you circulate amongst your family or friends, you could write something every month. So just start writing and read as much as possible and start writing. So that would be what you could do at this point of time, which would give you with the tools to become a good science writer 10 years down the line. And now maybe we can, and there are several resources which you can keep reading, and kind of which will help you build your skills. So one is, there is, maybe you can post the link in the chat box. So there is this journal called Frontiers for Young Minds. So this helps. So here researchers put versions of their research, which is for kids, and kids can be reviewers for those reviewers, or they can read those articles which are based on actual stories but written for kids, and then they can give their views on it, and they can be reviewers for those articles. So that's something which you can be involved in. Another thing which you can read is, there's also a website called Science News for Students. And this also has a lot of stories which are, of course, which is based on science but written for students. So just to give you an idea on, how science stories, how they are written. So there's something which you could understand because it's written for students and for kids, and you can just browse through it and kind of just go through these articles to see how these stories are written or how these articles are written. So just to kind of, keep reading more. That's what I would say, like, whatever you can grab your hands on. So just keep reading as much as possible, kind of understand how science is written, like how science writing is done. And then, of course, in due course of time, you could evolve your own style. Once you have the tools, you could have your own style. If you don't necessarily have to write like all these people have written, it's just to kind of give you an idea of how people write. But each writer has their own style of writing. So in due course of time, as you write more and more, you'll also develop your own style of writing. And yeah, so gets so only thing I would say is, yeah, gets start writing. And yeah, so just start writing on whatever you feel excites you, and you could start publishing like right now in which all of these places. And if not, you could, like we discussed, like start your own school magazine, start your own blog, or start your own thing which you could circulate amongst your family members. It could even be like a Word file or something where you have like small articles, and then you kind of share it amongst your friends and family. This is what I have written. So all of this are like countless things which you could start doing now. So yeah, best of luck. So if there's any question, like you could also like write to me. So yeah.
Thank you, Surat.
Thank
There
you.
are actually a few questions in the chat window, which I will read out. Anirudh had a question. So his question was, do science writers do only the writing part, or are there science writers who also do some science, who actually do experiments and other things?
Right. So there are certain science journalists who are called data journalists. So those kind of journalists, for example, sift through, for example, all of this. There are journalists who have gone through, for example, COVID data, and there are all of this data on public databases, so public health related data. So they have gone through those public databases, and then they have also kind of analyzed the data. It's also called investigative journalism, but then for science, for example. So it's kind of similar to that. So because many of these public health related data, scientists usually don't really do research on them. So there is a lot of such data out there. So which is often in the public databases. So you could go through that and then, kind of understand where something is going wrong, or if there's something which, someone has ignored, or some aspect which you feel needs to be investigated further. So kind of a criminal investigation, but in science, when you want to get to the bottom of when you feel something is not correct. So definitely, but then it kind of not in the conventional sense of research, but then you're doing like data journalism. That's something which science writers often do.
Okay, thank you so much, Surat. If anybody has any more questions, please, you can type them into the chat window. I already see there are a few people who put in like ideas for stories that they've had. So this has really been inspiring. Thank you so much, Surat.
Sure.
And like Surat said, please do, like, if something excites you, please do write. And she's already given you examples of so many places that you could write for. But if you also want to just send it to us, we are happy to host your writing on Talk to a Scientist's website.
Yes,
so
absolutely.
We are always open as an option for all of you. And I hope that this has been inspiring. I hope all of you who like writing and who like science can now see that you can actually combine both of them.
Yes, and Kashika had a nice suggestion of, she wants to look at what do we see differently with two eyes that we don't see with one eye. So that's a good point, like binocular vision. Why? Some flies have compound eyes, and there are some creatures that see in front with one eye and back with one eye.
Yeah.
So what are these different forms of vision? It's a great point. Yeah.
Yes, definitely. Yeah, that's why if you look around, there are like so many things which are happening around you, which are like so exciting, and so you can just definitely start writing more. all of those.
And we definitely caught the poop word on the slide because Anushka says between baleen whales eat and poop a lot more than we thought. I mean, we didn't really think how much they ate and poop, but it's a very catchy title.
And I mean, look at that. You can write an article about how much whales eat and poop. That does sound fun, doesn't it?
It does. It does. So that's great. All right. Thank you, Surat.